Welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolf here, going solo today, breaking down the Knicks 112 to 108 win over the Toronto Raptors. Why Jalen Brunson was maybe the most important factor in this game, even though Julius Randle had one of the more amazing first quarters in a season full of amazing first quarters. Plus, some more praise for other members of the team. An RJ Barrett injury update, which is maybe a little grisly. That's why I'm going to put it at the end of the show. And more coming up next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is brought to you by Madison Square Garden. Knicks action is heating up at Madison Square Garden. Get tickets at knicks.com/lockedon today. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. I appreciate you guys making us a part of your daily routine. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And I am breaking down the Knicks 112 to 108 win over the Raptors. And it was a heck of a ride. I found this game to be mostly full of just fantastic stuff for the Knicks. I mean, I thought that this was a team that obviously had their struggles against the Knicks, I think, a couple weeks ago. And had Siakam not gone off for like 50-something points, the Knicks might not have lost that game. I think that the fact that it was still so close, even with Siakam scoring 50 plus, really said a lot about the overall structure of that game. And like this game, I thought that it mostly came down to the fact that the Knicks got contributions from guys other than Julius Randle. Like Julius Randle maybe should be the lead story of this episode, but I feel like we talk about Julius first like all the time lately. So I want to kind of highlight some other things that I thought worked. And the main thing I think is Brunson in this equation, and his role next to Julius is sort of like the other top guy on the team, or sometimes the primary top guy on the team. It doesn't really matter, but just what a overall roller coaster it's been for the Knicks lately. 4 straight wins now after 5 straight losses after 8 straight wins. I think it's pretty safe to say that Brunson being back has been a huge part of the Knicks really starting to turn it around again. Jalen ends this game with 26 points, 8 assists, 5 rebounds, 9 of 19 shooting, and 3 of 6 from 3. He really is the perfect player to have like all the time. But I think especially with how Julius is playing right now, he's the perfect guy to have. He's basically slump proof, which he's proved outside of a stretch of a few games, one of which started on that first game against Toronto. They sort of flustered him in that first game, and then we saw him have a few straight so games after that. Although you could question if he was hurt then. It seemed like the injuries finally caught up to him when that hip injury hit. And then they just decided, okay, let's just get you totally back to, playing shape again, because you've clearly had a few things mount up here. But I mean, he can find his rhythm in the first, second, third, fourth quarter. Like it really doesn't seem to matter for Brunson, which is key, right? Because I think one of the big problems sometimes when you have a guy who's playing like Julius is right now, that's playing as well as he is right now, and especially doing it early in the game, you risk everybody else not getting into a rhythm as a result of one guy being so on early in games and being so hot. We've seen this before with the Knicks, like a couple years ago when they were so good, but Julius Randle was playing so fantastic. But it did seem like sometimes, because of how much of a hub he was for everything that the team did, and for all, for as much of the scoring that he covered and everything else, seemed like sometimes when the MO was get Julius the ball because he's cooking right now, it sort of made it harder for other guys to get going. And that could be a problem sometimes when you're talking about, a complete team effort over the course of a whole game. sometimes a guy gets going and he gets really hot and he stays going the whole game. The Knicks certainly have some experience with this recently with the, the aforementioned Siakam game, with, Luka Doncic going for over 60, whatever. Sometimes that happens, but more often than not, what happens is, especially with Julius lately, is a guy will get hot for a certain segment of the game, be it the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, whatever. And then, it's just a matter of having enough offensive firepower to still absorb when that guy cools off. And this is where Brunson really comes in, right? Like, he is able to get himself going pretty much anytime. And we saw that in this game. Julius was cooking so much early and he just kept feeding him. And the whole team just kept saying, no, like this guy's making so many threes right now. Like, he can't miss. Let's just keep feeding him and see what happens. But the second that the team needs a bucket, Brunson is almost always ready to go. Like, he doesn't need a warm up. He doesn't need to be in rhythm. You could just say, hey man, can you go get a bucket or draw a foul or whatever? And he pretty much just does it. And that's been sort of like the magic of having him at the point guard spot this year. You always know that he's going to have the ball in his hands and be able to make whatever the right call is down the stretch. And we've even seen him have the acknowledgement of, I don't have it going on this one particular night. Let me distribute and feed a bunch of other guys tonight instead. And he's done that a number of times too. So I really love what he does on the team. And I think we've sort of settled into this dynamic where Julius is the opener of games, Brunson is the closer, and RJ, when he's back, which will hopefully be soon, I'll have an injury update on him in a minute. It was pretty grisly, the update that he gave to reporters before the game. But he's sort of the in-between guy a lot now, where he's playing with the bench and, generating offense, when he's with that grouping, and, being sort of the main guy there and doing sort of some of the heavy lifting in between when, Randle is starting the game and Brunson is closing the game. So I really like the dynamic that these guys have going on. Just a little quick recap of the game overall before next segment. I'll get into Julius Randle and his absolutely crazy start and the numbers that he put up and some of the numbers he's put up recently. But the Knicks were up 16 in this game with just over 3 minutes to go, wind up winning by only 4. I wrote this down and then I thought about it for a second, and then I was like, no, you know what? I think my eyes were right here. Like, the offense definitely stalled for the Knicks a bit. And, that was because the Raptors threw an extremely borderline too aggressive full court press at them. I don't know for sure that it was called correctly. Like, it seemed like they were getting a lot of leeway to put bodies on the Knicks down the stretch. And maybe that's just defensive reputation or home cooking or, the refs wanting an exciting game to watch down the stretch. I don't know, but it seemed like the whistles were swallowed a little bit down the stretch. But, by whatever measure, the Knicks offense stalled down the stretch, but the defense, to my eye, never did. Even though the Raptors were scoring, I don't think the Knicks necessarily did much wrong down the stretch defensively. I think that the Raptors just made some really crazy shots. The one that really comes to mind is the one that almost was disastrous with Gary Trent Jr. hitting this 3 down the stretch. I mean, the Knicks had 2 defenders right on him contesting the shot, and he just leaned in and snaked his body between 2 guys and made a 3. It's like there's nothing you can really do in that scenario. Like, you've got the bodies on him, you've got the hands in his face, and he still makes it. It's just the team just got hot, and clearly this is the Raptors' MO. They talked about it 8 times on the broadcast about how they were down by so much against the Bucks and then came back and forced overtime and eventually lost to the Bucks in overtime. But, this team loves to make a late push. So the Knicks endured that. And look, the whole point is that's what good teams do. And I think the Knicks, whether it was Brunson coming back or whatever the case, they're back to playing with the confidence and poise of a good team now, where they know, okay, we have the ability to close this game out. They might make it interesting, but we'll ultimately still get the win because we've held this lead this whole game for a reason. Knicks teams of the past would not have gotten that memo necessarily. They might have, blown it and not gotten that. So kudos to the Knicks and, with how well that they did to close out this game. I want to get into the Julius Randle part of this game. Also, Mitchell Robinson, I thought, had a really great game. So I'll get into that in just a minute. But first, I do just have to remind you guys that today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. And as a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. And look, I have said a number of times on this podcast, I don't have a ton of experience as a hiring manager, but I do have a lot of experience as an applicant. And if I'm ever looking for a job, LinkedIn Jobs is always the first place I go. Their algorithm is fantastic. I don't know what it is about it, but they always put jobs in front of me that I might not have even necessarily thought to look for, but that fit my skills perfectly and, seem like really good fits. I've gotten some really good interviews that way from LinkedIn versus other places because something about the way that they structure their algorithm or whatever does a fantastic job. They help you quickly attract qualified candidates to your opening jobs with targeting tools if you are a hiring manager, and they go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post, company, and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates. You can identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect with them fast and for free. And they make it easy to screen and rate applicants based on job qualifications all on one platform. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, and I'm back to talk more Knicks and Julius Randle. It's taken long enough, right? I made sure to not talk too much about him in that first segment, but the stat line he put up in the first quarter was absolutely bonkers. He goes for 19 points, 5 rebounds, 5 of 7 from 3 in the first quarter. He nearly went 6 of 8 and had 20 points, but one of his threes was reduced to a 2 upon review. So he ends up with 19 points in that first quarter. And I mean, he was just cooking. Oh, that if he had gotten the 6, that would have tied a Knick record too, by the way. So just narrowly missed out on that as well. But yeah, I mean, he a Knick record for one quarter, I should specify. Anyway, he was just fantastic. I mean, he finishes the game with 32 points, 11 boards, 3 assists, 10 of 22 overall, 6 of 11 from 3. And look, there was a bit of that cool down, like I mentioned, and that's why I felt like talking about the contributions of Brunson, and then I'll talk about some of the contributions of some of the other guys. I felt like that was important to note because, Julius did the job and got the points early. He did, I won't say struggle, but, he cooled down to like a normal level, only scored 13 points through the other 3 quarters. But he just had a fantastic game overall. And really, if you look at it, part of the reason he didn't score as much going forward was because he was drawing a lot more defensive attention, and that allowed guys like Brunson and Quentin Grimes and Deuce McBride and Mitchell Robinson and others to still thrive despite his lack of production down the stretch or less production down the stretch than the crazy amount that he was putting up early. But that first quarter was just like, Wally Zerbiak does not, as much as he's not my favorite substitute color commentator, he described it as a cheat code, and that felt really apt. I mean, he was just the shots he was taking and making. If I was just looking at them and couldn't see whether they went in or not, I would be like, oh man, why are you taking that shot? That's such a tough shot. But all of them were going in, and there's no such thing as a bad made shot. So I'll take it. I mean, he was doing fantastic doing that. And I really think that he's starting to actualize as a floor stretcher here finally. So real quick, his stats from the last 16 games. He's at 29.3 points per game, 12.3 rebounds, 4.3 assists, shooting 46.4% from the field, 37.5% from 3, 72.5% from the line. And he's taking a whopping 9.5 3 attempts per game. I mean, I really think he's starting to actualize himself for real as a floor stretcher this year. Like, there's no asterisk on this year. The fans are back in the building, so it's not like 2 years ago when he shot 40% from three. But ultimately, we sort of realized, especially last year, like maybe things were not. Maybe the shooting development wasn't quite as real as we thought it was, based off of the fact there was no crowds. He was shooting in an empty gym in 20 to 21, and then last year had crowds back and did demonstrably worse and shot like 10 points less from three. This year, though, shooting 35% on the year now, which on the volume that he's shooting it at with the type of efficiency and the shots he's taking, like he's now back to taking lots of self-created threes, lots of step backs, lots of pull-ups. It's honestly very similar to the way that Luka Doncic bends the defense with his good three-point shooting. Like Luka is only a 34% three-point shooter for his career, and he's shooting 35% about or roughly 35% the last 3 years. But nobody would say that he's a bad shooter, and it's because he just takes a lot of these attempts that sort of need to be taken to keep the defense honest. Like they need to know, like, yeah, I will take this, and I'm going to make 35% of these, and you need to respect me from here. And then that opens up so much more for other players on the team. That's a lot like what Julius is doing lately. I mean, that was sort of what happened in this game. The Raptors sagged off him a little bit to start. He says, okay, makes a few shots, and then all of a sudden they're giving him tons and tons of attention. And that's what's needed, to as an engine of an offense and as a primary option. You need to not only score the points and stuff, but you need to make sure that teams respect where you're scoring them from. And I think he's garnering a lot more respect this year than he even did in 20 to 21, when I think teams used to kind of leave him open, but he was taking less attempts. And so, it was like, we'll take what we can get there because we know you're going to do most of your work in the mid range. So we'll work on focusing our defense there. Whereas now they're realizing, oh, you're going to take a lot of threes. Like you might take up to 10 threes in this game and make 40% of them. We can't have that. So we're going to have to start paying a little more attention to you now. It's been really great. And I think that, again, I've said this a million times, but I think this year so far has been better than his 20 to 21 year, especially considering in that 20 to 21 year, he really peaked late. It's easy to forget because it was a while back, but like the Knicks were roughly a 500 team for most of that season, if not a little below 500. And it was that 9-game win streak in a shortened season late in the game that then pushed them up to that 4 seed. And, it got them into that position, but they weren't like as good as they've been this year as a team throughout the whole year. That year, they really had a lot more to figure out. And this year they've been more consistently good, I think. I mean, obviously they just had an 8-game win streak and now are riding another win streak, but they're sort of, I think the team as a whole is better this year because of how Julius is playing and the fact that he's built a better shot profile for himself. He's currently averaging more points, better field goal percentage, and more threes made per game compared to 2020 to 21. And, if he could just be a dynamo to start games, he has guys to pick him up and pick up the slack and close games now. And more importantly, he trusts those guys now, and it's very obvious on the court. So lots to be happy about with Julius Randle right now. I want to get into Mitchell Robinson and a bunch of other guys in just a second here, because I thought that a lot of guys in this game had good things to talk about. But first, I do just have to remind you guys real quick that today's show is brought to you by betonline.net. And betonline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup. They've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can even find those on BetOnline as well, perhaps even Locked On Knicks. They always have the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. I'm always tasked with trying to find like one line that I think is maybe worth betting on. And look, I love futures bets. I'm not as great on the game to game, but I feel like I'm pretty good at picking out decent bets for futures. I really hate to say it right now, but perhaps Kevin Durant at plus 700 to win MVP is not a bad place to throw a couple bucks right now. With how well the Nets are playing, we know so often that award is a team success award. Like a great player, yes, like you have to be putting up the top numbers, but typically, unless you're putting up numbers that are so far above and beyond everybody else that they can make up for you playing for around 500-ish team, you've got to have a really, really good team too. And the Nets are playing better than pretty much anyone right now. So I think Durant's a pretty good bet to make right there. But you can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more at betonline.net. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And I have to also remind you guys that today's show is brought to you by MSG and the Knicks. Yes, indeed. What's up, Knicks Nation? As the new year gets underway, now is the time to start planning your visit to the Mecca of basketball, Madison Square Garden. Start off the new year strong with Knicks basketball. There's still tons of ball left to be played. We've got, wow, like 3 more months still, all the way up through April, and then probably some more after that if the Knicks make the postseason. So, definitely something to keep in mind. There's a lot of basketball left and plenty of time to go to the Garden if you haven't already. You want to be there to catch the action live and cheer on the Knicks. Knicks fans, as we all know, we're all Knicks fans, right? Bring the passion and energy and make it a true home court advantage, or we'll even let the players know when they're not doing well, if the players and team are not doing well. There truly is no experience like watching a game at the world's most famous arena. And I'll plug it again. Maybe I'll plug some other sections going forward, but one of my favorites lately, and I know it's polarizing, I know some people don't love it, but I love the Chase Bridge. I think those seats are sick. Like, you get basically like almost like a 45-degree angle of the court. Like, it's not quite bird's eye, but it's not quite, you're not like at a awkward angle. It's just a very cool angle to watch a game where you can really see plays develop and see things happen in real time, almost like you're watching like a big whiteboard of of like a play being drawn out. You can almost see it acting out in real time. It's very cool, especially if you're someone who's not quite as adept at X's and O's like I am. It's a great seat to have. So you need to be there to experience top tier competition at the Mecca of basketball, Madison Square Garden. Get your tickets at Knicks.com/locked on today. That's Knicks.com/locked on. All right. And I am back talking about the Knicks win here. Once again, 112-108 over the Raptors. I don't think it was nearly as close as the final score indicated. The Knicks obviously, I wouldn't say they let go of the rope down the stretch, but the Raptors grabbed the rope and tried to pull themselves back up. And like, if they were on the edge of the cliff, the Knicks just kind of like kept kicking them, being like, no, stay down in the pit there. You are not allowed back up. We're going to win this game. And eventually they did that. I really thought Mitchell Robinson did a fantastic job in this game. He put up, what was the final stats? I didn't write his final stats numbers down. He put up in total 10 points, 18 rebounds, and 2 blocks, 4 of 8 shooting against this Raptors team that was, as we heard from our friend from Locked On Raptors the other day, Sean Woodley, this team is built with a lot of really long, rangy type players, but not necessarily any like definitive big men. And Mitch is a big man, and it really worked for him in this game. I mean, those 18 boards, he was just, a lot of times in this game, he looked like a man among boys, like just with his ability to get rebounds and to contest around the hoop and stuff like that. He did everything that he does to the best of his ability. I thought it was a really great rebound for him compared to how things went in San Antonio the other day, where he got into foul trouble and some of sort of the old things that you don't want to see from Mitch popped up a little bit in that game. This was like a total polar opposite, where it was like, no, this is exactly what he should do against a team like this. And I just really, I think it was good to see him not get into foul trouble against 3 really long guys that can get to the rim, and especially Siakam, who's so good at generating contact and, generating foul attempts and stuff like that. His total for the game he had 11 free throw attempts, but like, I mean, that's pretty good when you consider how many he got against the Knicks the other week when he was playing so well and had the 50 points. So I think doing whatever you can to limit him is a good idea. And I think that Mitch did a great job of doing that, along with Randle. I think Randle did a good job too, along with others. There's a really weird, actually, I'll just bring it up right now. There was a really weird lineup that came out, and I'll tell you what my note was when I initially saw this lineup on the floor, but my mind was changed my initial note was no bigger reason to be excited for Obi Toppin to come back than a Hartenstein Mitch front court making an appearance. But there was this really bizarre lineup in the fourth quarter of Emmanuel Quickly, Deuce McBride, Evan Fournier, Isaiah Hartenstein, and Mitchell Robinson. And I was like, oh man, this isn't going to be great. Like, this is what an awkward lineup. A guy that was out of the rotation a very short time ago in Fournier, and then two true centers as your front court is just not the best thing in the world. But surprisingly, it kind of worked for sort of the exact reasons that I mentioned with Mitch working, in that they just were way too big for the Raptors. And this is maybe the biggest flaw of this Raptors team, is that if they hope to really go somewhere and advance far in the playoffs, you're going to eventually run into a Joel Embiid type player. How do you deal with that guy? Or how do you deal with Giannis if your guys just are not big enough, not strong enough, and can't stop, guys from getting rebounds and, getting putbacks and stuff like that? What's your course of action there? I don't know. But yeah, weirdly, the Hartenstein Mitch front court kind of had its little moment in the sun. I was very ready to hate it, but it kind of worked. I don't think I would go to it all the time, because I could definitely see it not working against like 85 to 90% of teams in the NBA, but maybe against a weirdly small team like this, it has its means of working, as long as it's not, gumming up the offense too much, which it didn't seem to. Um, I I think it's time to finally give the update on RJ Barrett's finger. Uh, Maybe skip like a minute if you're not into grisly details of injuries, but I have to retell this because it was part of the thing, part of the show and part of what came out today. But so RJ's finger sounds like way worse than just a laceration. We've all been talking so far about like, oh, Luca must have had like a giant freaking fingernail that he was able to cut RJ's finger so deep. Like, how in the heck did that happen just off a swipe, at the ball? Well, RJ gave the details. He said basically he dislocated it and then popped his finger back into place, and then only realized after popping it back into place that the dislocation was so bad that I guess it broke the skin and affected his tendons. And apparently it was quite painful and gave him a big laceration that he had to get about 6 stitches for. So that's gross. Apparently RJ's finger dislocated so bad that it broke the skin. I can only imagine how painful that must have been. Although kudos to him. I mean, I remember when it happened, he kind of just was like, ho hum, whatever. I can only imagine his finger was probably facing an entirely different direction than it should have been, which is just horrendous to think about. So get better soon, RJ. That sounds really, really bad. I really hope that you feel better soon and are able to get back on the court for the Knicks. So other guys that I want to highlight, Quentin Grimes, Deuce McBride, Emmanuel Quickly, all three guys, other parts of the young core here. I thought they all really had their moments in the sun in this one. They all made some great shots to build the lead up or stop the bleeding for the Knicks. And I thought that they were all just indispensable in this game. Quentin Grimes ends up going 4 of 10 from 3, did most of his damage earlier in the game, but he sort of was part of that contingent that picked up the slack once Julius cooled down a little bit in the first half. And then in the second half, he really did a good job in the third quarter of stopping the bleeding a bit. The Raptors were down a decent amount, and then Fred VanVleet kind of heated up and they got back to being, within a few points again. And Grimes was that guy who just kept, I think he had 2 of them, when the Raptors were kind of making their push, he made these 2 threes that just, kind of, I won't say suck the air out of the room, but at least stop the bleeding for a minute, long enough for the Knicks to kind of like recalibrate themselves and get to a point where they could build another lead. And that brings me to McBride, who was 3 of 5 from 3. And he had a couple big ones down the stretch in the fourth quarter. So in his final bench stint, with that weird lineup I just mentioned a minute ago, and then that lineup got Julius Randle back in it in place of Hartenstein at one point down the stretch there. So Deuce was playing with that grouping and made 2 huge threes that pushed the Knicks up. I think the highest was 13, and they would go on to lead by 16. But that lead was built a lot by that grouping and just their ability to make shots when they had to. And of course, as I mentioned, for the bigs to kind of take advantage of the matchups that were presented to them. But Deuce had his moment in the sun, and he's had his shooting struggles lately. But Gavin and I have been saying for a while, if he figures out the 3-point shot, that's basically all that's holding him back from being like a Marcus Smart type of player that can just go out there and bother everybody and make 3-point shots and overall be a nuisance that every other team and every other fan of every other team hates, but you love on your team. So hopefully, things are starting to turn a corner. And then Emmanuel quickly was cold from deep. He went 0 of 3, but went 4 of 5 on his twos and also generated 6 free throw attempts, which he made 5 of. And just had another fantastic game. When Brunson was not out there, this is another one of those things of, well, when RJ's healthy, RJ oftentimes will kind of split the initiation duties with quickly down the stretch and with the bench unit and stuff like that. I shouldn't say down the stretch, usually with the bench unit, second quarter and like third to fourth quarter is usually when they'll kind of split things. But quickly was kind of tasked with doing that all on his own. And as he's shown over the last month or so, did a really great job with it, dictated the pace and did the scoring that the Knicks needed from him, even if his 3-point shot wasn't dropping, which we know sometimes, especially earlier this year, when Quick's 3-point shot isn't dropping, it can sometimes kind of bleed over into the rest of his game. Did not in this game at all. So 2 more kind of big picture notes, and then I'll wrap things up here. So Monday's game against Milwaukee is going to be the exact halfway point of the season at 41 games. So at almost the halfway point of the season here, the Knicks are 22-18. To give an idea of the picture of what things look like right now, currently 2 games behind Philly for the 5 seed, 3 behind Cleveland for the 4 seed. They're tied with Indy for the 6 seed with a tiebreaker. They're 1 ahead of the Heat in the 8th spot, 3.5 ahead of the Bulls and the Hawks at 9 and 10. So it basically the same distance from the 4 seed as they are from the 10 seed. Just goes to show the East is tough this year. It's not going to get any easier for the Knicks. And utilizing the site Tankathon for something a little different than usual, I looked at their strength of schedule feature. They have a really nice, if you're ever looking to see how tough the Knicks or anyone else's schedule is going to be from here on out for the rest of the season, Tankathon, great resource there. And according to Tankathon, the Knicks have the 4th toughest schedule the rest of the way out. Their opponents have a 517 win percentage. And the toughest part here, they've cleared a lot of division games. And I think they'll be done with the Raptors by the end of this month. But they still have not played the Nets and the Celtics very much. They have 3 games each versus the Celtics and Nets down the stretch, 2 of the top teams in the East and maybe in the whole league right now. They also have 2 games against Cleveland. So they're going to get plenty of exposure to that top 4 in the East down the stretch of the season here. We're going to basically get a lot of opportunities to see how good this team really is. So it's pretty exciting. Hopefully with RJ back sooner than later, because you obviously want to see the Knicks operating at full steam against some of the best teams to get an actual gauge of how good they are. My guess still is the Knicks might end up in one of the 2 higher play-in situations in either the 7 or 8 seed. But maybe they hold on. Maybe they can still be a 6 seed throughout this whole process. I guess we'll have to see over the next couple months. And then lastly, I'll give a quick, he catches a lot of heat on this podcast. And so I will give a quick ode to him and some credit where it's due. Tom Thibodeau becomes the 8th coach to reach 100 wins for the Knicks in his coaching career. And so the other guys over the plateau, you have Red Holzman, obviously, at 613 wins, far and away the top. Joe Lapchick from the early days of the team with 326 wins. Then the 90s darlings, one darling, one not as much darling. Jeff Van Gundy with 248 wins. Pat Riley with 223. Then you have Hubie Brown and Mike D'Antoni with 142 and 121, respectively. Those last 2 actually had sub 500 win percentage overall. So, just maybe a little tougher, although Hubie Brown had a pretty rough couple years to work with, as did Mike D'Antoni. They both sort of were trusted with rebuilds in a way. D'Antoni had to start Chris Duhon at point guard for a number of years. So, it says a lot. But so they each had their moments, but were given more leash than most Knicks coaches ever. And then Mike Woodson with 109, who I would imagine the Tibbs will cross in pretty short order throughout the end of this year. But so hats off to Tibbs. Look, I still don't think that he is the guy that's going to take this team where they ultimately need to go or can go, but you have to give him more credit where it's due. He's taken this team to a place where they have a solid foundation and an identity, especially on the defensive end. So, big props to him for that. That defensive identity really shows through a lot, just in the toughness and the tenacity that these guys play with on a night-to-night basis is really a reflection of Tibbs and the sort of way that he has drilled them into being that sort of team. And I, I also just feel like I should note real quick on a funny/sad note, what a sad state of affairs the head coach list is for the Knicks outside of those first like 4, maybe even 3, because like Red and Joe Lapchick, cool, like glory days kind of coaches. JVG, everybody loves, but then once you get to Pat Riley and lower, man, there's just a lot of embattlement, a lot of controversy and stuff. And then, of course, that doesn't even get into the rest of the coaches. So again, it's been a lot of coaches who have survived less time and done a lot worse than Tibbs. So, props to him for getting this far and getting his 100th win. But anyway, I think this is a good note to wrap up on. So thank you all for listening. And we'll be back with more episodes next week, some game recaps, and maybe we'll try to get some guests or something. So lots of great stuff coming up. But till next time, thank you all for listening. Enjoy your weekends. Peace out, everybody. Talk to you soon.